Friends, it is my great privilege, my great honor with a U, and you'll know why I say with a U when you listen to my English, to welcome you this evening to this grief-stricken day of observance. So without much ado, I want to call upon Barbara Wind, who is the protege of Sister Rose Thiering, and who is, in my judgment, the leading Holocaust educator in this great republic of ours, who will extend the collective welcome.
Thank you. I'm not sure Keith Nunes was talking about me, but I'll take that. So I welcome you all on behalf of Federation and Kean University and my wonderful colleague, Dr. Janice Kropowski. We have the slideshow here of survivors, and they were all leading lights in Holocaust education and made New Jersey the top Holocaust education state in the country, maybe in the world. It's recognized as such. And so we're very happy to be here with you this evening. Your MC for the evening is Dr. Keith Nunes, who's a professor here in Holocaust Studies. He's also an attorney with many, many degrees to his credit, earned degrees. And so, Dr. Nunes, I'll turn the program over to you now to MC.
We now turn to anti-Semitism now, and our keynote speaker, the Honorable Irwin Kotler, Privy Councillor and Queen's Counsel. Irwin Kotler is the founder and chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights and Emeritus Professor of Law at McGill University in Montreal, and a former Member of Parliament, the former Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Canada, and an international human rights lawyer. As Minister of Justice and Attorney General, Irwin Kotler initiated the first ever comprehensive reform of the Supreme Court appointment process, and he helped to make it the most gender representative Supreme Court in the world. He appointed the first ever Aboriginal and visible minority justices to the Ontario Court of Appeal. He initiated the first ever law on human trafficking. He crafted the Civil Marriage Act, the first ever legislation to grant marriage equality to gays and lesbians. He issued Canada's first national justice initiative against racism and hate, and he quashed more wrongful convictions in a single year than any prior minister. Minister Kotler also made the pursuit of international justice a government priority by heading the Canadian delegation to the Stockholm Conference on the Prevention and Combating of Genocide, affirming this responsibility to protect doctrine in international law as a centerpiece of Canadian policy for the prevention and combating of mass atrocity. He initiated the first ever prosecution under the War Crimes and Crimes Against Humanity Act in Canada, and he intervened in the Mugasera case, which established the important principle and precedent that the very incitement to genocide constitutes the crime, whether or not acts of genocide follow. As a leading parliamentarian in the global arena, he's been the chair of the Interparliamentary Group for Human Rights in Iran. He's been the chair of the Interparliamentary Group of Justice for Sergei Magnitsky, the chair of the All-Party Save Darfur Parliamentary Coalition. As an international human rights lawyer, Professor Kotler has served as counsel to prisoners of conscience, including, let us remember, Andrei Sakharov and Natan Sharansky, the former in the former Soviet Union, Nelson Mandela in the former apartheid South Africa, Jacobo Timmerman in Latin America, Professor Saad Adin Ibrahim in Egypt, and he was a member of the International Commission of Inquiry into the fate and whereabouts of Raoul Wallenberg. He's a member of the international legal team of Chinese Nobel Peace Laureate Liu Xiaobo, and more recently he became the international legal counsel to imprisoned Saudi blogger Raif Badawi and the Venezuelan political prisoner Leopoldo Lopez and the Shiite cleric Ayatollah Boyariyedi in Iran. He's the recipient of 11 honorary doctorates and was the first Canadian recipient of the International Raoul Wallenberg Foundation Centennial Memory. May I include this introduction to Minister Kotler by disclosing that Minister Kotler's first teachers were his parents of blessed memory. His father, who taught him that the pursuit of justice is equal to all the other commandments combined. And his mother, who would say, if you want to pursue justice, you have to understand. You have to feel the injustice about you. You have to go in and about your community and beyond and feel the injustice and combat the injustice. That has been the strongest inspiration for his public advocacy and his accomplishments as a Jewish genius. Mr. Kotler.
Thank you, Keith, for those very kind and warm remarks. I particularly appreciate the reference to my parents, Zichronam Livracha, because they have been the inspiration for everything that I've had the privilege to be part of. I'm delighted to be here at King University, which has emerged as a centerpiece for Holocaust remembrance, for Holocaust education and research, and where the Human Rights Institute here at King University is itself anchored in the Holocaust Resource Center and been inspired by it. And I've been delighted to be able to join Holocaust survivors Bernard and Henry Schanzer, who bring firsthand living testimony about horrors too terrible to be believed, but not too terrible to have happened, and felt privileged to be able to be one of those honored tonight to light a candle, and in this regard, in remembrance, among others, of Chasidei Umot HaOlam, of the righteous among the nations. As it happens, we meet at an important moment of remembrance and reminder. We meet on YomHashoah, on National Holocaust Remembrance Day, which, as Elie Wiesel put it in his memorable words, that the Holocaust was a war against the Jews in which not all victims were Jews, but all Jews were targeted victims. And we meet also on the 23rd anniversary of the genocide of the Tutsis in Rwanda, where from April to the end of June 1994, every day for 3 months, 10,000 Tutsis were murdered while the world stood by as a bystander community. We meet also on the occasion of the discovery just a few days ago that the Allies knew already in 1942 that 2 million Jews had been murdered, that some 7,000 were being deported every day from Warsaw. And we knew, of course, even without this, that as early as 1935, the Nazis enacted the Nuremberg race laws, the institutionalization in juridical terms of Jew hatred and racism against the Jews, which served as prologue and precursor to the Holocaust. And we knew already in 1938 in Kristallnacht that they were burning books and burning synagogues and killing Jews. And the world watched if it was not also complicit. And so, on the occasion of this anniversary of anniversaries, we should ask ourselves, what is it that we have learned? And no less important, what is it that we must do? May I share with you some of the lessons of the last 80 years, effectively, and of our theme for this evening. The first lesson is the danger of forgetting, of the imperative of remembrance, of zachor, as the French put it, le devoir de mémoire, of the remembrance of victims who were defamed, demonized, dehumanized as prologue and justification for their mass murder, of the genocide of 6 million Jews, of whom 1.5 million of them were children, and millions of non-Jews, not as a matter of abstract statistics, but as we say on such moments of remembrance, that unto each person there is a name, each person is an identity, each person is a universe, as our sages have taught us, that if you save a single person, it is as if you have saved an entire universe. Just as if you kill a single person, it is as if you have killed an entire universe. And so the abiding first lesson that emerges, that we are each, wherever we are, the guarantors of each other's destiny. Which leads me to the second lesson, and that is the danger of anti-Semitism and the responsibility to combat it. Of anti-Semitism as the oldest and most enduring and most toxic of hatreds. If the Holocaust is a metaphor for radical evil, then anti-Semitism is a metaphor for radical hate. From 1940 to 1945, early 1945, 1.3 million people were deported to the Auschwitz death camp. 1.1 million of them were Jews. Let there be no mistake about it. Jews were murdered at Auschwitz because of anti-Semitism. But anti-Semitism did not die at Auschwitz. It remains the bloodied canary in the global shaft of contemporary evil. And as we've learned only too tragically and too well, that while it may begin with Jews, it doesn't end with Jews. A third lesson is that the Holocaust occurred not only because of the machinery of death, but because of state-sanctioned incitement to hate and to genocide. It is this demonizing of the other, this teaching of contempt, this is where it all begins. As the Supreme Court of Canada put it, and put it so well, the Holocaust did not begin in the gas chamber, said the court. It began with words. These are the chilling facts of history. These, as the court put it, are the catastrophic effects of racism. And we are witnessing yet again in our own day the contemporary manifestations of this old new anti-Semitism. The 20th century began, and it is not as well known as it deserves to be at times, not even known at all, that the 20th century began on January 3rd with the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, and I want to distinguish that. I want to distinguish the Iranian regime from the Iranian people, who are otherwise the targets of mass domestic repression continuing as we meet. But the 20th century began on January 3rd with the Ayatollah Khamenei saying there can be no solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict without the annihilation of the Jewish state. Did not even use the euphemism of the Zionist regime. And it has continued to the present day and into the 2017, where Israel continues to be spoken of as a cancerous tumor which has to be excised from the Middle East. And so we are witnessing the toxic convergence of the advocacy of the most horrific of crimes, namely genocide, embedded in the most insidious of hatreds, namely anti-Semitism, and finding expression where Israel becomes the only state in the world today, and the Jewish people, the only people in the world today that are the standing targets of genocidal anti-Semitism. And I've written elsewhere of 8 manifestations of this genocidal anti-Semitism, but I've identified thus far only one, that of the state-sanctioned incitement of Khamenei's Iran. A second metric of this new anti-Semitism is the globalizing indictment and demonization of Israel as a racist, colonialist, imperialist, apartheid, child-killing, genocidal Nazi state. And so Israel and the Jewish people emerge not only as the only state and people that are the standing targets of state-sanctioned incitement to genocide, but the only state and the only people that are cruelly accused of being genocidal themselves. And the next metric, and perhaps the most pernicious one, because it's the most sophisticated one, is the laundering or masking of anti-Semitism under universal public values, under the protective cover of the United Nations, where, for example, in an annual ritual at the United Nations General Assembly, some 20 resolutions of condemnation are adopted against one member state of the UN. Yes, it happens to be Israel. And some 4 resolutions against the rest of the world combined. Of the laundering of anti-Semitism under the authority of international law, it's perhaps not that well known, that only one state has been condemned and put in the docket of international humanitarian law and the Geneva Convention for violations of international humanitarian. Only one state has been so condemned in the last 50 years, and that state was Israel, and it has been condemned 50 times as the only violator of the Genocide Convention. Not Iran, not Russia, not Syria, only Israel. And the third has been in the matter of the laundering of anti-Semitism under the culture of human rights, where the United Nations Council on Human Rights held out to be the repository for the promoting and protecting of human rights, has adopted more resolutions of condemnation against Israel than again against the rest of the world combined. And where in the last year alone, Israel has been condemned as the only violator of health in the world, as the only violator of women's rights in the world, and where just 2 days ago, Saudi Arabia, the violator of women's rights, was elected to the United Nations Commission on Women's Rights. What more Orwellian inversion of law, morality, and human rights can you find? And finally, the laundering of anti-Semitism under the rubric of the struggle against racism. Let's face it, the worst thing you can say about anybody is to call them a racist. The very label supplies the indictment. And if you want to refer to a state, then you refer to it as an apartheid state. And the reference to Israel as an apartheid state is not accidental. For apartheid is defined as a crime in international law. If you say that Israel is an apartheid state, you are saying that Israel is a criminal state, a state that has no right to be. And that is not enough. You say it is not only an apartheid state, but you say it is a Nazi state. Therefore, it has not only no right to be, but we have a duty, in effect, to dismantle it. And it is this kind of laundering of anti-Semitism under the rubric of human rights, where human rights for 40 years now has emerged as the new secular religion of our time that posits Israel, as it were, as the major, if not only major, violator of human rights. It becomes, as it were, as a new geopolitical antichrist of our time, and where the campus culture is a human rights culture, it feeds and underpins the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. Which leads me to the next lesson, and that is the dangers of indifference and inaction in the face of mass atrocity and the responsibility to act and protect it. What makes the Holocaust, what makes the genocide of the Tutsis in Rwanda so unspeakable is not only the horror of the genocide itself. That would be bad enough. What makes it so unspeakable is that the Holocaust and the genocide in Rwanda were preventable. Nobody could say we did not know. We knew, but we did not act. Just as nobody could say with respect to Darfur, we did not know. We knew, but we did not act. Or Syria, after 6 years now, no one can say that we did not know. We knew, but we did not act. You know, at the end of the first year after what was initially begun as a peaceful protest by young people in Dara in southern Syria, there were, at the end of that first year in Syria, some quote-unquote only 7,000 dead, some 20,000 displaced. And I don't like to use statistics in any abstract sense because I say behind every statistic is a human being. But now, some 6 years later, there are over 500,000 that have been killed. 12.5 million Syrians that have been displaced. 7 million that remain homeless as we speak. Over 5 million refugees. We have the greatest humanitarian catastrophe almost since the Second World War because we did not intervene at the beginning when the mass atrocities began. That we did not exercise our responsibility to protect, which the UN Security Council, UN General Assembly unanimously adopted in 2005, which said that if there's ever a country in which war crimes and crimes against humanity are being committed, and the government there is unable or unwilling to do anything about it, or worse, as in the case of Syria, is the author of those crimes, then there's a responsibility to intervene and protect the innocent civilians. But those of us who argued back in 2011 that this is what needed to be done, were told, well, you know, if you intervene, this will lead to civil war in Syria, this will lead to sectarian warfare, this will lead to jihadists coming in. Everything we were told would happen if we intervened happened because we didn't intervene. Which leads me to the next lesson, which follows inexorably from this, and that's la trahison d'éclair, the betrayal of the elites. Nuremberg crimes were the crimes, as Elie Wiesel put it, of the Nuremberg elites, of doctors, lawyers, judges, engineers, architects, church leaders, educators, and the like. And so, as Elie Wiesel taught us again so compellingly, that it is our responsibility always to speak truth to power and to hold power accountable to truth, which connects to the next lesson, and that is the dangers of assaults on the vulnerable, the vulnerability of the powerless and the powerlessness of the vulnerable. The Nazis began with assaults on the powerless and the vulnerable. Henry Friedlander points out in his book on the origins of genocide, the first group singled out for murder in the Holocaust were the Jewish disabled. And so it's our responsibility to give voice to the voiceless and to empower the powerless, which include amongst them always the poor, the sick, violated women, battered children, refugees, and the like. In fact, the most important lesson, most important human rights lesson that I was ever taught was taught to me by my daughter when she was 15 years old, when she said to me, "Daddy, if you want to know what the real test of human rights is, always ask yourself, at any time, in any situation, in any part of the world, is it good for children? Is what is happening good for children?" The Holocaust was horrific for children, and in particular Jewish children. And the world today still stands by while children are themselves being abused, violated, tortured, enslaved, and the like. Which brings me now to the final lesson, and that is the dangers of a bystander community and the importance of remembering and paying tributes to the rescuers like Raoul Wallenberg and Karl Lutz and the like. Let me give you just one dramatic example. From May to July 1944, in a period of some 10 weeks, 440,000 Hungarian Jews were deported to the death camps in Auschwitz. It was the most efficient, cruelest, and fastest killing field in the whole of the Holocaust. Raoul Wallenberg arrived as a middle-level diplomat in the Swedish legation in Budapest in mid-July. And then he, together with Karl Lutz and others, saved a remnant of 100,000 Jews. So what Chasidei Umot HaOlam were able to do, what the righteous among the nations were able to do, in less than 6 months in Hungary in 1944, the international community was unable to do and became complicit in mass atrocity and genocide, with 440,000 deported to their death in Auschwitz in a period of 10 weeks. And the final tribute I want to pay here is to the survivors amongst us, the survivors who are here and their families. For they endured the worst of inhumanity, but somehow, like the Schanzer brothers, somehow found in the repository of their own humanity the capacity to go on, to build their families, and to build their communities. And in fact, Keene College, New Jersey, is the beneficiary of the great historical contribution that Holocaust survivors have made here. And so I close by saying with them and together with them that we must always remember and pledge that never again will we be indifferent to incitement and hate, that never again will we be silent in the face of evil, that never again will we indulge racism and anti-Semitism, old and new, that never again will we ignore the plight of the vulnerable, and never again will we be indifferent in the face of mass atrocity and impunity. But we will speak up and we will act against racism, against hate, against anti-Semitism, against mass atrocity, against injustice, and against the crime of crimes, whose name we should even shudder to mention, namely genocide. As the survivors, in their deep and unfathomable courage, would found the capacity to sing, "Sag nicht keinmal, as du gehst den letzten Weg." Never say that you are traveling the last road. They somehow foresaw, and we can state today, that we live now in a time when we have a state of Israel as an antidote, as Elie Wiesel put it, as an antidote to Jewish powerlessness. That we have a Jewish people, a people rich in resources, in intellect, in the capacity to do good. That there are non-Jews that are prepared to stand with the Jewish community, that who understand, and as I've always said, that I come to the support of Israel, not simply because it's a Jewish cause, because that would not be enough for me, but because with all its imperfections and inadequacies, like any other democratic state, it is, in the last analysis, a just cause. And if it's a just cause, then it deserves the support of all men and women of goodwill, Jew and non-Jew alike. And as my parents also taught me when I was young, and with these words I close, that we must always remember that Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, that at the end of the day, truth and justice will prevail, and that is why Zog nicht keinmal the geist am letzten Weg, never say that you are traveling the last road. Thank you.